James Lynch here for MMA News. Happy to be joined by UFC commentator Brendan Fitzgerald. We're going to talk a little bit about UFC 256 and his crazy schedule this year. But first off, Brendan, how you doing?
Doing great, James. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And unfortunately, didn't get to see you in person this year.
I know.
As much as I like, but that'll come hopefully next year.
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone. I didn't go to any events even before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, I can't leave Canada. So I'm stuck here. But I've been watching a lot of your stuff, and it's been really cool to see. I actually wanted to start first with your YouTube channel. I know that you brought it back, and you've been doing the Zoom interviews. I saw you interview Brandon Moreno the other day. How's all that going?
It's going good, man. I was, when I started my podcast, I wanted to do long form interviews, and I was just so gung ho on being in the same room with that person. And I underestimated how tough it would be to do that, but I still kind of clung to it. And, pre-pandemic, you can still make it happen and the episodes be sporadic. But then I wanted to start doing video, and then you're talking about setting up a camera and being in the same person. And so I just didn't do it. But I realized during the pandemic, I was like, look at all these talk shows. Like, I was still listening to some really high quality, good interviews that were remote. Like Howard Stern is still doing great content, and a lot of people are still doing great content. And I go, man, if the content's good enough, people will watch it and people will listen to it. And, so for me, I enjoy doing it, and I know that I can still interview fighters, and I try to book people with that relationships I already have, instead of just trying to meet them for the first time in that platform, to try to have people on that I know a little bit, and then our chemistry is kind of, already built in a little bit.
Oh, yeah. It makes things way easier. I have sort of the benefit of a lot of these fighters I've talked to even before they got in the UFC, so it's kind of a little bit easier. But I know what you mean. It's just more comfortable when you're talking to someone that you're familiar with already. So totally get you on that. How has this year been? I mean, it's been crazy for everyone, but for you specifically, like, were you ever worried when the pandemic first hit? I know the UFC was very careful about safety protocols, but was part of you ever worried, like, I hope I don't get something? Like, what was your thoughts initially when the pandemic hit in terms of your job?
Initially, like a lot of sports broadcasters, I was nervous for my job, not from a I hope I don't get it standpoint. I hope our sport continues, and I hope the world doesn't fall apart and I can still earn a living, really. Mm-hmm. I've trusted the UFC and Dana White and everybody that we work with, that they always do right by us. And so I just thought that they would always put the proper measures in place, and then you got to take some onus on yourself to be wearing that mask the whole time. And obviously we've learned different things about the pandemic from the time that it started. So, and in the beginning, I was a little more loose in terms of like, like in Jacksonville, for instance, we all tested there, but then we were free to go out to restaurants at night, and we did that. And then some other people are going to restaurants now, but I'm not, because I just want to hunker down and not catch anything, not give extra work to Anik or anybody else that it might fall on if I do get sick. And so, man, I mean, I've felt safe the entire time in a working capacity. Whenever there's a lot of people out there working jobs and they don't get a test every time they go in. And that's the case with us at the UFC. Every time you're going into work, you have gotten tested either a day before or a couple of days before. And on event day, everybody has to be cleared. So, no, I was nervous at the very, very beginning of, I hope we can still do our shows and everybody can still have a job. And then pretty quickly, based on what Dana was saying, it was like, all right, I work for the right guy. Our show's going to continue. We're going to crank out a lot of shows, and we'll be busier than ever. And we have.
What about like quarantining and stuff, like after the event? Because I know that obviously cuts into your family time. Like, you got to be away from everyone, right, when you're kind of, after you do an event and all that. Like, how has that been? Just because, you get a lot of alone time, right, basically, with the quarantining.
Well, for me, it's not nearly as bad because I live here in Las Vegas, and that's where obviously our events are. And so the protocol is, most of the work we do is remotely now. Like, the fighter meetings are kind of remote, and we handle everything as safe as we can. And then on Friday nights, I have to get a test and stay in a hotel the night before the event. My test comes back negative on Saturday, and I go into work. And then from then I come home and I take a shower when I get home, and then I'm kind of back to normal. So for me, it's not a lot of quarantining away from the family other than that night before. And so we've just kind of like made that be the pattern. And then when I've gone away to Fight Island, you're kind of quarantined, and, I don't know. We don't really do like the separate thing when I come back from Fight Island or when I came back from Jacksonville. It's just, trust that I took care of myself along the way, and I was around other people that were tested and cleared, and, cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Let's talk about UFC 256. Really good card this weekend, all things considered, with some of the changes. But I'm really intrigued by this main event because of the fact we've got two guys who just fought 2 weeks ago. How much do you think the weight cut thing will play into this, especially with Figueiredo, because he had weight cut issues earlier this year. To have that quick of a turnaround, I know guys are in shape, but also that's really hard on your body to cut weight twice in the span of 2 weeks. What are your thoughts sort of on that angle heading into the main event in the flyweight title fight?
I guess I haven't done a ton of reading like today, and obviously the media things will come out, so I think that they'll answer those questions. But in all the interviews, they haven't really done a ton of talking about that weight cut. It's almost like, since it's the same for both, they don't really seem to be bringing it up as a talking point. For Brandon Moreno, I had him on my podcast, and he was like, I'll just continue to eat vegetables as long as I have to get that title shot, so he had like one cheeseburger, I think, the night he beat Brandon Royval, and he said, let me finish my burger, and then I'll start thinking about taking a fight in 3 weeks. He doesn't get a lot of notoriety as a guy that cuts a lot of weight or that the weight is tough on, but I think anybody competing at 125 is cutting some weight to get down there, because you're just talking about grown men getting down to 125 pounds. That's just a low weight, and the percentage of weight that they have to take off is, when you compare it to somebody at light heavyweight or middleweight or whatever the weight class is, it's a chunk in terms of body percentage. So I haven't seen a lot on there. I mean, I expect a good fight. Davidson's one of those guys that always flirts with that 125, 126, and now he doesn't have that grace pound. So we'll see how he attacks it. But they each made it all good last time. So fingers crossed we don't get any crazy issues this Friday.
I know Anik is sort of the betting guy between you guys in terms of the commentary crew, but I did take a look at the odds, and I believe Davidson Figueiredo was almost like a 3-1 favorite in this fight, which surprises me a bit, not because of how well Davidson's been, but that Brandon Moreno is an extremely durable fighter. I think the last time he was finished in a fight was during the Ultimate Fighter. Do you feel like that's something that's kind of going overlooked in this fight, just because Davidson's been putting guys away, but Brandon Moreno's not really that guy you can do that against?
I know Moreno, even when he lost in Chile, was it to Pantoja? It's just, he kind of got decisively beaten in that fight, but there was no chance that he was getting finished in that fight. You know what I mean? And I think with Davidson Figueiredo, you're talking about, number one, he's a finisher. Number two, if you ever think of recency bias, it's 3 weeks from when he tapped out Alex Perez, who's also a durable guy, in under 2 minutes. I mean, so people are remembering that, and they're hedging against that. Why would you bet that all of a sudden he's not going to do it?
Right.
I think that's the case there. But I was looking, because I was curious what Cejudo was when he fought DJ the second time. And Cejudo was like plus 360 or something like that. So I've thought Moreno in that underdog role is certainly a live underdog. And I guess I'm not shocked that Figueiredo is minus 300 just because he was around that against Perez, and I think a lot of people probably view them as similar challenges.
Good point, for sure. We got a great co-main event as well. Big boost to this card, adding Tony Ferguson and Charles Oliveira. One kind of interesting tidbit, I always kind of find these angles sort of heading into a fight, is this whole thing, if Charles Oliveira misses weight, Tony Ferguson says he's not going to take the fight. Is that gamesmanship? What do you take away from a quote like that from Tony Ferguson?
I don't know, right? For some other people, you kind of get a read on what it might mean. But for Tony Ferguson, what does it mean? Does it mean he wants more money? Does he know that he's really important to selling some pay-per-views this week? I've actually never called a Tony Ferguson fight, and I haven't really interacted with him at all, because he's obviously on major pay-per-views. He's fighting for a title. And then also he's not this media darling that's around on Fight Week as a guest fighter and doing all these appearances like that. I'm a big fan of him and how he fights and all that sort of stuff, but he's certainly an enigma in terms of trying to figure out what he means all the time and decoding the language that he uses with all those capital letters and abbreviations and acronyms and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know, man. He's certainly important to the UFC roster. He's important to the lightweight division. He's very important to this card coming up. But Charles Oliveira isn't a guy that misses weight. He fought at featherweight. I don't know if he's ever 155. So I think we're good.
No, that's what I thought as well, too. Now, there's sort of two ways to look at this fight, and this is sort of my view on this, is that was it a case of Tony Ferguson showing a decline in that last fight against Justin Gaethje with the layoff, with the injuries, or was it a case of just bad circumstances where he's fighting a guy in Gaethje who's very hot, he had an opponent switch up, and he cut weight twice in whatever period it was just to make a point? Where do you sort of sit on that? Because I think that's the big question heading into this fight. Does Ferguson still have something left in this fight against Charles Oliveira?
Well, the win streak that he was on, and then for it to end like that. I don't like when we just put fighters out after a performance. Like, I've talked to Dan Hardy and John Gooden about this. I remember one time, and they were just like, for everything to line up on fight night and then deliver into your performance, like, there's a lot that has to go right. There's weight cut, there's nutrition, there's how you're feeling. Like, we see quarterbacks have bad games.
Yeah.
We see pitchers in baseball, Clayton Kershaw, go out in the playoffs and just, give up 3 home runs. He doesn't give up 3 home runs in 5 months during the season. So, like, that's where I lean more with Tony Ferguson. It's like, you mentioned it, double weight cut, all of a sudden no fans. He was supposed to fight Khabib. Now he's fighting for an interim title. His chance to, really get to where he wanted to go was just taken from him. And then all of a sudden you're in a silent environment when the world comes back for fighting, and he has a bad performance. I don't, look at Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega sat out for longer, but man, like, Max really took it to him. And Brian's told me that it was because he got ready and he was peaking in the summer, and then that fight couldn't happen International Fight Week, and then he was just overtrained, he was tired of it. So he had a bad performance. So for Ferguson, I can see that that's, what happened to him. And I'm not going to say he probably doesn't have anything left after he won double digit, set the record for lightweight win streak, and then has a bad night against a really great fighter, and then now he doesn't have enough. So that's where I am with Ferguson. I expect to see a great version of him.
Yeah, I think so too. And, he is, I think on paper, if you look at the two fighters, I mean, you would have to favor Ferguson, but we'll see sort of how it unfolds. I think great opportunity for Oliveira, and I think well-deserved I think people forget at the start of the pandemic, Charles Oliveira got a pretty quality win over Kevin Lee and beat Kevin at his own game and actually kept the fight standing. So I think this is, to me, is probably the toughest fight to pick on the card if you're looking at it sort of top to bottom. Another fight I wanted to mention on here, Junior Dos Santos taking on Cyril Gane. Now, Gane's a guy I've been very familiar with because he actually started his career in TKO, which is promotion I'm quite familiar with in Canada, and actually beat a really tough prospect by the name of Adam Deiska, who a lot of people felt in Canada was going to be sort of the next big thing, and Gane put a halt to that very quickly, knocking him out, I think, in the second round. But Cyril Gane's the biggest betting favorite on this card, and Junior Dos Santos, I mean, I don't think you can ever overlook him, a former champion. He's fought the who's who, but I do wonder here, Brendan, if Dos Santos gets knocked out again, which I think is possible, is this the end of the road for him because he can't keep taking this much punishment?
Yeah, you hate to say that too, right? But, and he's a former champion. And not only that, he's just the friendliest guy ever. He's just the nicest guy, so friendly. He's one of those guys where you see on fight week and his smile and his demeanor and the way that he treats people, it makes you just feel good. And it makes you like, I wish the best for that guy. Like, I know he's in a fight against somebody else. I'm calling the fight. But just you just want the best for a guy like Junior Dos Santos because of what he's done, number one, and then number two, who he is and how he treats people, or maybe reverse those. Number one, because of how he is and who he treats people. Number two, because of what he's done. But yeah, I mean, you look at who he's gone against. It's Ngannou, Blades, and Rosenstruik. It's guys right in the top of that heavyweight division. So I don't know if it's up to him, maybe, if it's retirement time, or is he like one of those other guys where they ride a losing streak and it's like, well, if you lose to 2, 3, 4, and 5, let's say, you might be 6. Mm-hmm. Like, you might still be the 6th best heavyweight in the world. So maybe you fight 10, maybe you fight 12, and then like really kind of show that you still do belong. So maybe that's what's at stake here for him. But the fact that Gane is such a big favorite, that kind of jumped out at me too, because I checked those odds last night. And, with us maybe getting to Paris in 2021, if we can start traveling again and France starting to jump on that MMA train, Cyril Gane might be a real big star in the making, perhaps.
Huge opportunity for him on Saturday. What do you think is sort of the sleeper fight on this card? There's a lot of good fights. This is not maybe the most sexiest pay-per-view, and I use that word in terms of like, you're not getting like a, Khabib and Gaethje type of fight on here, but in general, there's a lot of good fights. Which one sort of stands out to you as one that maybe people are overlooking a little bit?
So Gavin Tucker, Billy Q, give me every bit of that fight.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what to expect in it other than a good one, especially after Gavin Tucker makes that return, and he had a great fight against James, and he really kind of controlled it, but he's still just like a banger. And then Billy Q just does that every single time out. So I'll give you that one for that. That one's easy. And then, man, I hope Peter Barrett can kind of show something against Chase Hooper.
That's another one. Did you see the odds on that? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, Slippery Pete is he's a funny dude, man. He's from my neck of the woods, and you know, everyone loves Chase Hooper and the young gun that, you know, we expect him to become. So I think that's a great way to kick off the night.
I do too. Yeah, Peter Barrett's a huge underdog in this fight, which I don't really understand because he's got a lot. I know he lost his debut, but look at who he's losing to. Yusuf Salal, one of the best prospects. Like, I think that's going to be a very much closer fight than what the odds are sort of indicating there. And that's nothing. I love Chase Hooper, but you're fighting a guy in Peter Barrett who's got a little bit more experience on the regional scene. So we'll see if that ends up panning out. So that's 256. I want to talk to you about a couple other things. You and I have something in common. I am a Barstool fan. I love watching their content. Let's forget about all the political stuff. Just their actual content. I enjoy it. It's great. I know you and Robbie Fox connected and all that. How was that?
Politics.
Well, just, you know, some people find that they're a bit controversial. That's all. So I don't want to go there, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, it's, you know, so how was it getting to talk to Robbie?
Oh, Robbie's great. I've been a fan of Barstool because, you know, they're a Boston-based company. When Dave was dropping off papers at liquor stores, and my brother-in-law at the time worked at a liquor store, and he brought it to me one time, and he was like, this paper's pretty funny. It wasn't even online. It wasn't even a website yet. Then a few years later, I'm in college, and it's like a blog that's funny. And sure enough, it's just kept climbing. And I can't believe everything that it has turned into. And like, they started doing dance parties, and like every single thing that they've crossed off the list, I've been like, wow, like, good for them. It's amazing. And now, you know, 80 something employees, maybe more at this point, all different cities, all different subjects. So I wanted to meet Robbie when he was there for Conor McGregor and Habib, just because I was a Barstool fan. So I went up to him and I was like, hey, it's good to see how the pirate ship stays afloat, you know?
Right.
It's like, he just has his, you know, Robbie's sitting there, he's got his full Conor McGregor kind of green tracksuit on, and then he has his camera guy with him, because it was cool to see how they make the content, you know? And so the camera guy's like getting his reaction of everything that happens, you know? And the camera guy actually happened to be from my hometown in Massachusetts, and, you know, went on to say, he was Dana. And he went on to sell those Zillion Beers T-shirts. He had his moment where he was selling all sorts.
I bought one. I thought it was hilarious.
So, yeah, it's just so cool how everybody there is just hanging out. It's kind of like Old School, the movie, where it's like created this fraternity for adults where they all just get to hang out, and everybody kind of gets to be a part of it if you watch along and you're a fan. So, but talking to Robbie's great, because I have a lot of respect for what he's been able to do and make his way in this like content business. He's not a broadcaster, not a media member. He won't call himself that, but the support that he has, kind of the grassroots following that he has at such a young age is to be admired. So that's why I like.
And he's a great interviewer. Like, he's someone that I watch and I'm like, wow, like, I wish I, like, cause, you know, he's very just like, he's polished. He knows his stuff. He's very calm. That's why Dana keeps doing interviews with him, because he's actually like, he knows his stuff. It's not like he's getting, you know, stuff that's like, you get on other outlets where you can tell they're not doing the research. Like, you can see he's digging in there and getting good stuff. So I actually sat next to Robbie at 244 last year with Masvidal and Diaz. So that was kind of cool getting to see him there. So that was fun. That's how I got to know him a little bit. But
I think Dana too goes on his show because like Robbie is a fan. Like, he'll tell you he's so I think Dana almost views it as, I'm talking to the fans. When I'm talking to Robbie, I'm talking to the fans in general, and he kind of attacks it in a different way than when he's at a press conference. For sure.
So you're a Boston guy. I know you're a hockey fan, if I'm not mistaken. Are you a Bruins guy?
Yeah, I grew up playing hockey. Hockey was my sport. You know, high school, club hockey in college, and I still got my stuff in the garage. I just haven't been able to dust it off. But yeah, hockey was always my number one sport growing up.
Do you still follow it now? I don't think we've ever dug into this before.
Yeah, you know, like once I started covering sports and you start getting to a certain level, you start just pouring your life into what you're covering to be as good as possible at it. And so when it comes to hockey, like, I'll watch the playoffs and I'll keep track, and I'm a Golden Knights fan because they kind of came into existence like when I moved out here, and obviously had that great season. And I just so gravitate towards people now for sports instead of laundry, as they call it. Like, I just don't live and die with a team because that's where I'm from or that's whatever. It's more about the story. So, you know, I follow it a little bit, but I'm not like watching every Bruins
religious.
game.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Like even for me, like MMA is sort of immersed in my life so much, but I make a point to watch the Canucks. Obviously, it's huge here being from Vancouver. As you know, you were here last year with the UFC Vancouver card, so it's interesting.
Well, I want to rub it in, but like 2011 when the Bruins Canucks was the best 2 months of my life. It was
like the worst for me. Luckily, I was living in Toronto at the time, but yeah, it was still pretty bad. So
I was living in Texas, so I hadn't moved back to Boston and covered big time sports yet. So I was still just such a fan of the top level of sports. Now I started covering sports in Boston, ESPN. Once you start getting at the higher levels, sports, you view them differently. You almost view them more as entertainment and like, this is what we're selling as a product and this is my job. And it changes instead of like when you're a kid in a candy store, like, oh, let's go team and all that stuff. But 2011, I lived in Texas. I was staying up late. I was recording the games, avoiding the scores. I almost broke my ceiling fan when Horton beat the Canadians in overtime in Game 7. Like, best thing ever. So, the Bruins always stay near and dear. In terms of the other Boston teams, they like it's not as special. I joke with people like I'm a Raiders fan now because I live in Las Vegas, and Patriots fans can't, don't tell me you're a Raiders. You can't do that. It's just like, I don't know, man. I live in Vegas now, whatever.
Before we go, any plans for the holidays right now? Do you got that figured out? We got the one card obviously next week, but then there's a bit of a break until January. Yeah,
so I'm calling the card next week. And, name-wise and rankings-wise, it's probably the deepest card that I'll have called to that point, assuming that enough of those fights stay together. And then just staying home, still got to do some Amazon shopping, figure out what to get for my wife. And, our son's 5, so he's like primetime Christmas, Santa, tree, driving around to see Christmas lights at night and everything that we can. But we're kind of staying put, just us 3 at home and staying in and staying safe as much as we can. And it'll be nice to go a couple of weeks with just nothing to do work-wise almost and just kind of keeping an eye on the news. And, we'll see what happens in January. But I'm scheduled to, to be a part of, the support system for wherever those first fights end up being in January. But it'll be good to have a few weeks off.